Minjun, if you marry Kira, you will lose your inheritance.
The rain in Seoul that night fell the way rain falls in stories that do not end the way anyone planned. Inside a long room with mahogany walls and amber lamplight, 5 people sat around a table that had been polished by the same hands for 40 years. At the head of the table sat a woman in pearl gray silk, her silver-threaded hair pulled into a chignon so precise it could have been carved. Beside her, a man with severe silver hair combed back from a deeply lined face, a gold pocket watch chain catching the light from the lamp. To her right, a family lawyer with a leather portfolio open on the table. Inside the portfolio, a single document. Beside the document, a fountain pen, uncapped, waiting. Across from them sat a man in his mid-30s, charcoal suit, white shirt buttoned high, silver cufflinks at his wrists. His hands were unnaturally still on the wood. His face was giving nothing. The document in front of him named a foreign artist who was to be financially severed from his life within the week. The same document named the woman he was to marry within the year. The fountain pen had been uncapped already. His mother had not yet looked up from her own folded hands. His father was waiting. He picked up the pen. Slow. Measured. The room exhaled. He set the pen down again, uncapped, beside the document. He stood. His mother's smile, which had been arriving on her face all night a half-second too late, did not arrive at all this time. His father did not move. The lawyer's eyes flickered to the portfolio. The young man walked to the door of the room he had been raised inside. He did not look back. He opened the door. He stepped through. The door closed behind him with the soft, expensive click of wood that had been carved by a craftsman who had been dead for 30 years. The room he left behind held its silence the way a body holds the breath before it screams. Across the city, in a small studio with a single lamp burning and rain on the windows, a woman 6 feet tall with long black box braids past her waist stood at an easel with a brush in her hand. The paint on her fingers had dried hours ago. She had been waiting. She had been waiting for hours. She did not know if he was coming. She did not know if he was allowed to come. She only knew that the last thing she had said to him 3 weeks before was "Get out of my studio," and that she had been regretting those 4 words every minute since. A knock at the door. Soft. Once. Her brush stilled mid-stroke. She did not move toward the door. She closed her eyes. And she understood, in that small, wet, quiet moment, that whoever was standing on the other side of that wood, this was the moment her life was about to choose. Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories Vault. If you are new here and you just felt what I felt in that opening, take a breath, tap that subscribe button, and stay close, because every single story we tell on this channel is built for the kind of viewer who knows what it feels like to wait by a door for someone whose name you are afraid to say out loud. You are exactly where you need to be tonight. Now let me take you back. Let me show you how a Korean heir from one of the oldest families in Seoul ended up standing in the rain at the door of a Ghanaian woman with paint on her hands. Let me show you what he gave up. Let me show you what she almost lost. Let me show you the love story they were never supposed to have. It started, the way most love stories that change a life start, on a perfectly ordinary afternoon that nobody marked at the time. Her name was Kira Boateng. She was 31 years old. She was Ghanaian British. She was 6 feet tall, full and curving and unmissable in a room, with long thick black box braids that fell past her waist and a face that carried the kind of cute warm smile most people do not earn the right to see. She had come to Seoul 3 years before with 2 suitcases and a bank account that could keep her alive for 14 months if she was careful. She had been careful. She had been more than careful. She had built, slowly, in the small streets behind a hardware market in a neighborhood most foreigners never bothered to learn the name of. A studio where she painted portraits in oil for clients who found her by word of mouth and never asked her too many questions about why she had left London. She did not talk about London. She did not talk about the gallery on Cork Street that had promised her a solo show 3 weeks before opening night and then sat her down in a quiet office and told her, with the voice people use when they think they are being kind, that the board had reconsidered the marketability of the body of work. She did not talk about how the gallery owner, a woman she had trusted like an aunt, had suggested that perhaps Kira could be the painter behind the scenes while a more marketable face represented the work publicly. She did not talk about the 9 months after that conversation when she did not pick up a brush. She did not talk about the morning she finished her first painting after that silence and walked to the bank and wired the contents of her account to a small studio in Seoul and bought a one-way ticket the same afternoon. She did not talk about any of it. She painted. She woke up before dawn. She brewed Ghanaian cocoa the way her grandmother had taught her, stirring it slowly with a wooden spoon, humming softly to a kitchen that contained no one but her. She stretched her own canvases. She mixed her own pigments when she could afford to. She called her mother in Accra every Sunday and never told her about the gallery in London because her mother already worried enough. She called her best friend Mame in London every other day, and they laughed too loudly across continents, and Mame, who had sat with her on the kitchen floor for 9 hours the day after the gallery meeting, never once asked her if she was coming back. That was the life she had built. It was small. It was hers. It was the first thing in her adult life that no one in power had touched, and she protected it the way a person protects the only thing they have left. His name was Min Jun Lee. He was 35 years old. He was the only son and sole heir of the Lee family, one of the oldest and quietly most powerful chaebol families in Seoul, a family whose wealth had been built on shipping in the 1950s and whose name was now spoken in the same breath as cabinet ministers and prosecutors. He had been engaged twice and disengaged twice before he turned 30. He had attended his first board meeting at the age of 8, and his mother had sat him down that same week and told him that the Lee family did not have the privilege of being soft, that he must learn to keep his face still, that whatever he felt must never reach his face. He was 8. He had learned. By the time he met Kira, he had not been surprised by a single thing in his life for 19 years. He was athletic in the lean, disciplined way of men who train alone and never in front of mirrors. He was not movie star handsome. He was something better. He was lived in. He was real. There was a faint hint of premature silver beginning at his right temple, and a quiet set to his jaw that came from holding too many opinions inside too long. He wore charcoal and midnight blue suits and crisp white shirts buttoned high and silver cufflinks at his wrists, and underneath those suits, hidden along the left side of his neck and across the entire span of both forearms, ran a slow private body of black ink work. Lines and small symbols and unfinished pieces. The autobiography he had never been allowed to write any other way. His mother had never seen them. His father suspected and had never asked. He had walked into Kira's studio on a Tuesday in March under the pretext of commissioning a portrait of his late grandmother. That was the version he gave her. The version he did not give her was that he had seen her work in a small online catalog by accident 2 months earlier and had not been able to stop looking at it. That his grandmother, the only person in his family who had ever sat with him in silence without expecting anything from him, had told him when he was 12 years old that the only painters worth trusting were the ones whose work made you feel watched back. And that Kira's work, when he found it that night in his apartment with a glass of soju growing warm beside him, had made him feel watched back for the first time in 23 years. He arranged the commission through an assistant. He showed up himself. When he walked through the door of her studio that first afternoon, he stopped at the threshold for a full 3 seconds before he announced himself. He had not planned to stop. His feet stopped without him, because the woman in the room, 6 feet of her in an oversized linen shirt the color of oatmeal, paint on her fingers, braids pulled over one shoulder, standing at an easel in the warm gray afternoon light of a soul that smelled like rain coming, was the most quietly arresting thing he had seen in his entire life. She had not noticed him yet. She was leaning into a stroke. The light was on her cheekbone. The smile she had reserved for the painting in front of her was a private smile, soft and unguarded, and he understood, in the half-second before he made his presence known, that he had walked into the wrong room and that he was not going to be able to leave it. He cleared his throat. She turned. The smile she gave him was not the private one. It was the polite one, the professional one, the one she gave clients. It was warm enough. It did not reach her eyes the way the other one had. He noticed. He sat down in the chair she gestured him toward. He explained the commission in 3 careful sentences. He named his grandmother. He named the dimensions he wanted. He named the timeline. He did not name the price because he had been raised to consider the naming of prices in front of an artist a small disrespect, and Kira, who had spent 3 years in Seoul being asked by every wealthy client she dealt with to justify her rate, noticed that he did not ask. She quoted him a number. He nodded. He paid the deposit on the spot, in cash, from a soft leather wallet that contained more money than her studio was worth. He did not perform the wealth. He simply set it on the table the way a person sets down something they are returning to its rightful owner. He stood. He thanked her. He told her he would return the following week to sit for the preliminary sketches she would need of his grandmother's likeness based on the photographs he was going to bring. He left. Kira watched him go from the studio window, her arms folded across her chest, the polite smile already gone from her face, replaced by something more careful and more curious. She watched him cross the small wet street below and step into a dark sedan that had been waiting at the corner. She watched the sedan pull into traffic and disappear. She turned back to her easel. She picked up her brush. She did not paint for 10 minutes. She did not know why. He came back the following Tuesday. He brought 3 photographs of his grandmother in a small envelope. He sat in the chair across from Kira's easel. He watched her hands. He answered her questions about his grandmother in short, careful sentences. She smelled like jasmine. She liked the color of the sky just before it rained. She was the only person in our house who laughed out loud. Kira sketched while he spoke. The light moved across the studio floor. The kettle whistled at one point. He stood up and turned it off without asking. She did not stop sketching. She did not say thank you. She noticed. He stayed for 2 hours. He paid for the time on the way out. The next Tuesday he came back again. And the Tuesday after that. By the 3rd visit, the kettle was already on when he arrived. By the 4th visit, there was a second mug on the small wooden tray beside her brushes. By the 5th visit, neither of them mentioned that he had been in her studio for 5 Tuesdays in a row when the original commission required only 3. She did not ask. He did not explain. Mame asked. Mame called her on a Sunday from London, and Kira mentioned in passing, the way a person mentions something they are pretending is small, that the client was coming back again on Tuesday, and Mame went very quiet on the line for a full minute before she said, "Babe. Babe, listen to me. He has been in love with you since week 2. You just have not been ready to hear it yet." She laughed too quickly. She told Mame she was being ridiculous. She told Mame the man was a Chable heir from one of the oldest families in Seoul, and that men like that did not look at women like her in studios in neighborhoods like hers. And Mame, who had been her best friend for 16 years and had seen her through every version of herself, said softly, "Kira, you are 6 feet tall, you have a smile that has stopped men in 3 countries, and you paint like someone who has been told the truth about what her hands can do. Stop listening to the version of you that London tried to leave you with. He is coming back because he is in love with you. Now the question is whether you are going to let yourself see it." Kira got off the phone. She did not paint for the rest of the afternoon. She sat on the floor of her studio in a patch of late sun and looked at the chair Min-jun sat in every Tuesday and tried to remember the last time a man had sat in a room with her for 2 hours and not once asked her for anything. She could not remember. What Kira did not know, on that quiet Sunday in her studio with the light moving slowly across the wood floor, was that the man who sat in her chair every Tuesday had already been studied. What she did not know was that in a different part of the city, in a study with mahogany walls and amber lamplight, his mother had already lifted a phone to her ear and said, in a voice soft enough to be tender, "The foreigner. The painter. I want her file on my desk by morning." What she did not know was that the woman in pearl gray silk had been watching her son's face at the family dinners and had seen, for the first time in 20 years, the smallest crack in his composure when his phone buzzed and the screen lit briefly with a name she did not recognize. And the woman in pearl gray silk had spent 35 years protecting her family from exactly this. She was not going to allow her son, the only thing in her life she had ever truly loved, to fall in the way she had once almost fallen, before her own family had pulled her back to the man whose name she now carried. The clocks had begun to run against each other. The slow, soft clock of 2 people falling in love in a studio with rain on the windows, and the fast, invisible clock of a woman in a study who had already decided, with the calm of a general, that the love was not going to be allowed to live. The 3rd Tuesday after Mame's phone call, Min-jun walked into the studio and did something he had never done in any room outside of his own apartment in 19 years. He took off his suit jacket. He hung it on the back of the chair. He rolled his shirt sleeves to the elbows, and the black ink along both of his forearms appeared in the warm gray light of Kira's studio for the first time. Long flowing line work, lines and small symbols and unfinished pieces. The slow private autobiography of a man who had never been allowed to be seen in any other way. Kira's brush stilled. Half a second. No more. She did not turn her head. She did not stare. She kept painting. But the half second was enough. He registered it the way a man who has spent his entire life watching for the smallest reactions in the smallest faces always registers a half second. And the air in the studio shifted in a way that neither of them named. She painted for 40 more minutes. She ran out of the specific shade of warm brown she needed for the underpainting. She reached for it without looking, knocked the small jar from the table, and it rolled toward him on the floor. He bent. He picked it up. He stood and walked the 3 steps to her easel. He did not hand it to her. He set it on the small wooden tray beside her brushes, in the exact place she always kept it. The place she had never told him she kept it. The place he had watched her reach for 12 times in 3 weeks and remembered. She stilled. She did not look at him for a long second. Then she did. He was already looking back. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Somewhere in the background the kettle was whistling. Rain had started on the window. The brush in her hand had paint drying on it. He gave her the almost smile. One corner of his mouth lifting before the other. Eyes warm a full second before the rest of his face followed. She gave him, without meaning to, the cute warm smile. Eyes crinkling first. Dimples arriving at the corners of her mouth. The whole face opening for him. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then she turned back to the canvas. Then he sat back down in the chair. Then the kettle was taken off the heat, and the rain kept falling, and the painting continued, and neither of them mentioned what had just happened, because both of them already knew. Min-jun went home that night and did not sleep. He sat in his apartment in the dark with his arms still bare and his shirt still rolled to the elbows, and he thought about the 4 seconds across an easel in a studio he had no business being in, and he understood, with the calm of a man who had finally been told the truth about himself, that he had been falling in love with her since the second visit and that he was not going to be allowed to keep her. Because he knew his mother. He had spent 35 years being his mother's son. He knew exactly what was coming. That night, in his apartment with the lights off and the rain on his windows, Min-jun Lee did something he had not done in 19 years. He opened the small private accounts he had been quietly building for 5 years in a bank his mother did not have channels into, and he began, with the discipline of a man who had been raised to plan 3 moves ahead, to move money. He bought the debt of a small soul gallery that had cancelled Kira's contract 3 months earlier without explanation. He bought the building her studio was in through a shell company registered in his late grandmother's maiden name. He opened a private channel to a contact at the immigration office and paid quietly for her visa paperwork to be expedited and sealed. He did not tell her. He did not plan to tell her. He had already decided that the most loving thing he could do for the woman with paint on her hands was protect her in silence, because he understood, before she did, that the moment she knew, she would refuse to let him do it. He understood her pride before he understood her name. The Tuesdays continued. The kettle was always on. There was always a second mug. The chair across from her easel became, in some quiet way neither of them named, his chair. He brought her answers slowly, week by week, to the questions she had been asking him in passing and forgotten she had asked. What color do you wear when no one is watching? He told her, one Tuesday in May, that on the rare nights he was alone in his apartment with no one to see him, he wore a deep wine red sweater his grandmother had knitted for him when he was 16. It was the only red thing he owned. She painted in deep wine red the next week. She did not say why. He noticed. What did your grandmother smell like? He told her, one Tuesday in June, that his grandmother had smelled like jasmine and old paper and the cold tea she drank it for in the afternoon for 50 years. She brought a small bunch of jasmine to the studio the next Tuesday and put it in a glass jar on the windowsill. She did not say why. He noticed. What is the last thing you did because you wanted to? He could not answer that one. He took it home with him. He sat with it for 3 weeks. And on a Tuesday in July, with rain coming in through a window he had not yet replaced, he told her very quietly that he had walked into her studio in March because he had wanted to. That it was the first thing he had done because he wanted to in 19 years. She did not look up from the painting when he said it. She did not say anything. But her hand on the brush did not move for almost a full minute. And in the silence between them, something neither of them was ready to name was being built, slowly, brick by brick, in the warm gray afternoon light of a small studio in a neighborhood most foreigners never bothered to learn the name of. Then, on a Wednesday in late July, the world Min-jun had been holding back began to break through. Kira got a call from her gallerist. The contract for her solo show in the spring had been cancelled. No reason given. Just cancelled. Kira sat down on the floor of her studio with the phone in her hand and felt the old London sickness rise in her stomach. The recognition of a shape she had survived once and was apparently going to be asked to survive again. She called Mame. She did not call Min-jun. She did not even consider it. 2 weeks later, the gallerist called her back. Apologetic. Confused. The cancellation had been reversed. The show was back on. The schedule had been restored. The gallerist did not know how. He just wanted her to know. Kira said thank you. She got off the phone. She stood in her studio in the late afternoon light and she tried, very briefly, to understand what had just happened. She did not understand. She walked to her chair, the one Min Jun sat in every Tuesday, and she sat down in it for the first time. She sat in his chair and she looked across the room at her own easel and she tried to see the studio from the angle he saw it from. From his chair, the painting on her easel was directly in his line of sight. From his chair, the windowsill with the jasmine was at the corner of his vision. From his chair, when she stood at the easel with her braids over her shoulder and her arms moving across the canvas, she was the only thing in the room a person could possibly look at. She sat in his chair for a long time. She did not understand yet. But something in her had begun to. The unmarked package arrived at her studio door 3 days later. She opened it on the floor of her studio with the door still ajar. Inside, wrapped in soft white paper, was a small box of Atadwi milk, the Ghanaian sweet she had mentioned to Min Jun in passing in May, the one her grandmother used to make in Accra when she was a child, the one she had not eaten in 11 years because no one in Seoul sold it and she had not had time to make it herself. There was no note. There was no card. There was no name on the package. Just the sweet, and a small handwritten line on the inside of the lid, in careful handwriting she had seen exactly once, on a check he had paid her in March. For when the work is hard. Kira sat on the floor of her studio with the box of Atadwi milk in her lap and she cried for the first time in 3 years. She did not call him. She did not text him. She knew it was him. She let herself cry. She let herself eat one of the sweets. She let herself sit on the floor of a studio in a neighborhood most foreigners never bothered to learn the name of and feel, for the first time in her adult life, like she was being looked at the way she had once stopped believing she would be looked at. And then she stood up. She wiped her face. She put the box on the windowsill beside the jasmine. She picked up her brush. She did not say anything to him on Tuesday. He did not say anything to her. But the 4 seconds across the easel had become, slowly, an entire shared silence, and the silence was holding more than either of them had said out loud. The ledger fell out of his coat pocket on a Thursday in August. He had left the coat on her chair. He had been called away by a phone call he took outside the studio. He had hung up. He had walked back in. He had picked up his coat. He had left for the night with the coat folded over his arm. The small leather ledger had slipped out of the inside pocket sometime during the phone call. It was on the floor under the chair when she walked in the next morning to start work. She picked it up. She opened it. She saw, in his careful handwriting, the names of every gallery in Seoul that had ever canceled a contract on her. Beside each name, a date. Beside each date, an amount. Beside each amount, a notation in Korean she translated slowly with her phone. Debt purchased. Debt held. Debt released. She turned the page. She saw the name of the building her studio was in. She saw the date her landlord had suddenly stopped raising the rent 6 months ago. She saw the shell company beside it. She saw 3 pages later a line item that simply read Visa expedited private channel completed. She saw her own name on the last page in his handwriting. Just her name, underlined once. Nothing else beside it. Every quiet afternoon in her studio rewrote itself in her mind. The kettle that was always on. The second mug. The cancelled contract that had reversed itself. The unmarked box of Atadwi milk. The window latch that had broken in March and been fixed by morning. The studio chair. The 4 seconds across the easel. The man who had been sitting across from her every Tuesday had been waging a private war on her behalf for 5 months against his own family. In silence, and she had not known. She closed the ledger. She sat on the floor of her studio in her wet coat and she did not move for a long time. She did not feel grateful. She felt the floor of her life shift beneath her. Because every promise she had made to herself 3 years ago in London, every vow that her work would never again be touched by the hands of someone in power without her permission, every careful boundary she had rebuilt herself inside, had been quietly, gently, lovingly violated by a man who told himself he was being kind. She did not call him. She waited. He came on Tuesday the way he always did. She was standing at the window when he walked through the door, her braids pulled back into a thick low bun, her face the fury state, utterly still. The ledger was on the table between them. Min Jun stopped in the doorway. He saw the ledger. He did not pretend not to see it. He closed the door behind him very quietly. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw anything. She spoke in a low, even voice that was the most terrifying thing he had ever heard. because he understood in real time that she had thought about this for 40 hours and every word had been chosen. She told him he had treated her like a project. She told him he had decided her survival without asking her. She told him he was exactly the kind of man she had come to Korea to escape. She told him the worst part was not that he had done it. The worst part was that he had done it for 5 months and looked her in the eyes across an easel and let her believe she was rebuilding herself with her own 2 hands. He did not defend himself. He stood very still in the studio doorway and he let her finish. When she was done, she told him to leave. He nodded. He turned. He opened the door. He stepped out into the rain. The door closed behind him. Now listen to me for a moment, because if you have made it this far into the story and you are feeling what I am feeling, I want you to do 2 small things before we keep going. Tap the subscribe button if you have not already. Send this video to one person, a sister, a best friend, a partner, the one person you know who lives for stories where love finds its way through impossible circumstances. You are clearly invested. We see you. We are grateful you stayed. Now let me show you what happened on the other side of that closed door. Because the worst was not over. The worst had only just begun. In a study across the city, the same evening, the woman in pearl gray silk lifted a phone to her ear. Good. The painter has cut him off. We will not need to extend the visa problem any further. Withdraw the file. She hung up. She took a slow sip of tea. She did not smile. She did not need to. What Soo-Jin Lee did not know, what she could not have known, was that her son had been the only thing standing between the foreign painter and the campaign she had set in motion 6 months earlier. The levy was Min Jun. The levy had just been removed by the woman it was protecting. And now the water was coming, and Kira did not know the water was coming, and she had just sent away the only man in Seoul who could have stopped it. The cancellations began within 72 hours. The gallery contract was cancelled again. This time publicly. The gallerist apologized. The gallerist said his hands were tied. The gallerist did not look her in the eye. The visa office called Kira in for a meeting and informed her that there were irregularities in her paperwork that might require her to leave the country within 90 days. The owner of her studio building knocked on her door on a Wednesday morning and told her, with genuine apology, that the building had been sold, and the new owner was raising all rents by 400% at the next renewal. Mame was on the phone within the hour. Babe, listen to me. This is not a coincidence. This is too coordinated. Whoever was protecting you stopped protecting you, and now someone is moving on you fast. Where is he? Where is the Korean? You need to get him on the phone right now. Kira sat at her kitchen table with the ledger she had not returned to him. She did not call him. She could not. She had told him to leave. She had meant it when she said it. And now she was sitting at her kitchen table in a city that was closing around her, with the proof in front of her that the only thing standing between her and erasure had been the silent love of the man she had told to leave, and she did not know how to lift the phone. Across the city, the crucible was closing on Min Jun at the same time. His mother had called a family meeting. His father was at the head of the table. The lawyer was back. The document was back, redrafted with sharper teeth. Min Jun was to sign the financial severance from Kira. Min Jun was to commit to the marriage to Yoona Choi within the year. Min Jun was to do both of these things by the end of the week, or his place in the family would end. The trust would end. The name would end. He would be cut from the company, cut from the inheritance, cut from every channel of the life he had been raised inside. His father spoke for the first time in the meeting. Quietly, Min Jun, you are my only son. Do not make me do this. It was not a threat. It was a plea. And it was the most painful thing Min Jun had ever heard from his father. Min Jun did not answer. He went home. He did not sleep for 2 days. He sat in his apartment in the dark with his arms bare, the tattoos he had been hiding for 13 years visible in the lamplight, and he stared at his hands and he thought about a studio across the city and a woman in a thick low bun with paint on her fingers who had told him to leave, and he understood, with the calm of a man who has been told the truth about himself for the second time in a year, that he was not going to sign the document. The tea ceremony was on a Friday. Yoona Choi was across from him in pale rose silk, her hands folded in her lap, her dark hair long and straight to mid-back, her face the trained, composed face of a woman who had been raised for this room since she was 16. The families were seated around them. Soo-Jin was watching her son's face for any sign of weakness. Yoona lifted the cup of tea and offered it to him in the formal gesture, the gesture that, if accepted, signified acceptance of the engagement. Minjun did not lift his hands. The room stilled. Yuna set the cup down very slowly. She looked at him. And then, in a voice quiet enough to be heard only by him, she spoke. I do not want to marry a man whose heart is somewhere else. I will not be the woman who breaks two lives to save my own. If you let me, I will tell our parents that I am the one who refused. The shame will be mine. You take what you have left and you go. She was 28 years old. She had spent her entire life being prepared for this room. She had just chosen, in front of every person who had raised her to obey, to be honest. Minjun looked at her. He could not speak. She gave him the smallest nod. Go. He stood. His mother stood. His father did not. The lawyer reached for the document. The document was going to be enforced regardless of who refused first. Minjun would lose everything. He kept walking. He walked out of the tea house. He walked out of the courtyard. He walked past the dark sedan that had been waiting for him at the curb for 13 years. He walked into the rain without a coat. He kept walking. He walked across the entire city of Seoul in the suit he had worn to the tea ceremony, his silver cufflinks catching the streetlights, the rain soaking through his jacket and his shirt and his hair, and he did not stop for traffic and he did not check his phone and he did not slow down for 43 minutes, because he had finally understood what his life was for, and the answer to it was on the other side of one specific door across the city, and he was not going to arrive there in any way, other than on his own 2 feet. He arrived at her building. He climbed the stairs. He did not knock. He stood at her door in the rain, water dripping from his hair onto the threshold, and he waited, because he understood that this time, she had to be the one to open it. Inside, Kira was at the easel. She had been at the easel for 48 hours. She had not slept. The painting in front of her was a portrait she had not planned to paint. It was him, the man in the chair across from her easel. Sleeves rolled, ink on his forearms. Eyes warm a full second before the rest of his face followed. She had not planned to paint it. Her hands had painted it anyway. She heard him at the door. She knew it was him before she turned. She set the brush down. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the wood. She closed her eyes. She opened it. He was soaked through. His face was the resolved state. His eyes were exhausted. His hands were still. She did not speak first. He did. I am sorry. I was wrong to do it without telling you, and I understood even when I was doing it that I was wrong, and I did it anyway because I could not find any other way to keep you in the world. I am not asking you to forgive me. I have signed nothing. I have lost the family, and the trust, and the name, and I am standing at your door with nothing in my pockets except the choice I just made. He took a breath. The choice was you. The choice has always been you. The choice was you since the second visit, and every move I made after that was just the long, slow attempt of a man who did not know how to say it, learning finally how to say it. He stopped. She was crying. She had not known she was crying. She stepped forward. She put her hands on his soaked lapels. She pulled him into the studio out of the rain. She closed the door behind him. She told him, in a voice that was shaking and clear, that she did not know yet how to forgive him, that she was going to need time, that she might need months, that he was not going to be allowed to fix anything for her without asking, that her work was hers and her life was hers and her decisions were hers, and she would not let any man, including the man she was in love with, decide her shape for her ever again. He nodded. He said yes. He said yes to all of it. And then he said the only thing he had left to say. I love you. I have loved you since the second visit. I will love you whether you let me stay tonight or not. I will love you whether you let me stand beside you while you rebuild this, or whether you ask me to do it from across the city in silence. I am not asking to be the one who saves you. I am asking to be the one who is allowed to stand here while you save herself. Kira looked up at him. 6 feet of her, soaked at the lapels where she had gripped him, braids damp where they had brushed his coat. The cute warm smile arrived. Slow, in stages, eyes crinkling first, dimples at the corners of her mouth, the whole face opening finally, completely, for him. She told him to stay. A year passed. The rain returned the morning of the anniversary. It tapped at the studio windows the same way it had tapped the first afternoon Minjun had walked through her door. Kira was at her easel. Minjun was in the chair across from her, the same chair he had sat in for a year now, watching her hands move the way he had watched them the very first day. Sleeves rolled, tattoos visible, hands still. She finished the painting. She set the brush down. She looked up at him. He was already on his knees. He had been carrying it for weeks. A diamond ring. $1 million of quiet light resting in a small velvet box that had been waiting in his coat pocket through 3 rainy mornings, because he had wanted the moment to choose itself. He told her he had loved her since the second visit. He told her he had not known what his life was for until she let him sit in the studio and watch her work. He told her he was not asking her to be a Lee. He was asking her to be his wife, to let him spend every remaining morning of his life in this exact chair, watching her paint, watching her live, watching her become every version of herself she had not yet met. He asked her to marry him. She said yes before he finished the question. A few days later, she told him she had a surprise. She would not say what. She drove him through Gangnam in the late afternoon light and parked in front of one of the most exclusive menswear boutiques in Seoul. The kind of place where the doors were opened for you by men in white gloves. She walked him in by the hand. She turned to him in the soft golden light of the showroom, and she told him she wanted him to choose 5 suits. Whichever ones he wanted. No price ceiling. No discussion. She was paying for all of them. Min-jun stared at her. In all his 35 years of life, no woman had ever offered to spend a single one on him. He had been the wallet, the heir, the resource, the prize. He had never been the one being given to. He asked her very quietly why she was doing this. His voice was careful, the way it was when he was trying not to feel something too large too quickly. She told him he was the kindest man she had ever known. She told him he had gone to war with his own family in silence so that she could keep painting. She told him that before he had walked into her studio, she had begun to believe she was someone the world had decided to forget, and that he had sat across from her every week and made her remember that she was a woman who deserved to be seen. She told him everything in her life had turned around the moment he chose her, and that she had been waiting for the chance, just once, to choose him back in a way he could feel. The tears arrived before he could stop them. Min-jun Lee, the man whose face had never cracked in any boardroom, who had been trained since boyhood never to let his feelings show in public, stood in the middle of a luxury boutique in Gangnam and let the tears fall down his face without wiping them. He told her, his voice breaking softly, that he could not let her pay, that her wanting to was already more than he had ever thought he would be given, that she had already given him every gift he would ever need, just by saying those words out loud. He picked the suits, all 5 of them, and when the moment came to settle the bill, he stepped forward and paid for them himself, the way he had paid for everything in his life, except this time it was different because he was not paying to buy something. He was paying because she had let him be loved for the first time in his life, and the suits were the smallest possible thank you he could think of. They walked out into the rain that had just begun to fall on the Gangnam pavement. The driver opened the door of the car. Kira slid in first. Min-jun followed. The door closed, and before the car had even pulled away from the curb, he reached across the seat and took her face in both hands and kissed her the way a man kisses a woman who has rewritten what he believed about being loved. She kissed him back the way a woman kisses the man who has finally taught her that being seen was never the danger she thought it was. The car pulled into the soft Seoul rain. The 2 of them stayed exactly where they were, holding each other in the back seat, laughing quietly between kisses, whispering things that belonged only to them, every breath an answer to the question they had spent a year asking each other in silence. If this story moved you tonight, take a moment in the comments to tell us what you felt. Tell us who it made you think of. Tell us which moment between Kira and Min-jun stayed with you the most. The 4 seconds across the easel, the unmarked box at her door, the man walking across Seoul in the rain to a closed door, the kneel at the studio in the morning, or the tears in the boutique in Gangnam. We read every comment. We read them slowly, because at Afro-Korean Love Stories Vault, we believe that love, the real kind, the kind that survives everything, is always worth the wait. Until the next story, stay close, stay open, and let yourself be seen.